prison has a smell. It's not just metal and bleach. It's something deeper, like time that's been left to rot, like regret soaked into the walls, like a heartbeat that won't quiet down, no matter how many layers of concrete you bury it under. I'd only been inside for 2 hours, and I already knew I didn't belong here. They threw me in my cell just after lights out. No introductions, no explanation, just a guard shoving me forward, and a door slamming shut behind me with that clank that rattled my spine. I stood frozen in the darkness. Then I heard it, a voice low and calm. You breathe that loud all night, and we're going to have a problem. I turned toward the sound. A silhouette sat on the top bunk, back against the wall, one leg dangling off the edge. He didn't move much, just enough for me to know he wasn't asleep. "I'm Tyler," I said, trying to sound steadier than I felt. Long pause. Then, and I didn't ask. "Charming." I didn't sleep, not just because of the thin mattress or the flickering hall light leaking in through the bars, but because of him. He didn't snore, didn't toss or turn. He just lay there, silent, still watching. Or maybe that was my imagination. I didn't know what was real anymore. I was in for something I didn't do. At least, not the way they said. There was a fight. There was a body. And yeah, I was there. But I didn't kill anyone. The camera footage that would have cleared me? Gone. Deleted. Technical issue, they claimed. Just like my clean record. Just like my life. The next morning, I got a better look at him. He was already sitting up when I opened my eyes. Shirtless. Muscular. Tattoo across his shoulder that looked like it had been carved with pain. Not ink. He had this calm anger in his face, like he'd stopped expecting anything good a long time ago. "Bathroom's yours," he said, without looking at me. I blinked. "Thanks." I hadn't expected manners. In the yard, I noticed something strange. Guys nodded at him as he passed. Not in fear, not in respect. Something else. Recognition. Like they knew something I didn't. Later that afternoon, I asked the guy who handed out books in the library, "Who's he?" The guy chuckled without looking up. "You don't know who your cellmate is?" "Should I?" He leaned forward, voice low. "They call him Jax. 3 years in. Never talks. Never fights. But the last guy who messed with him hasn't been seen since last spring." I swallowed. "Why?" He smiled. "'Cause Jax doesn't leave loose ends." Back in the cell that night, I watched him from my bunk. He sat cross-legged on the floor, reading something under the faint ceiling light. His fingers moved slowly across the page, like he was searching for something hidden between the lines. "Why are you in here?" I asked. He didn't answer. "I mean, if you don't mind me asking." He turned one page, then finally said, "You asked too many questions." "Sorry. It's just, everyone here seems to know you. No one knows me." I looked at him. That a fact. He closed the book, stood, and climbed up to his bunk in one smooth motion, then added, without looking at me, "But maybe you will." The next few days blurred. Routine. Silence. Stares. Every night, Jax would read. Every morning, he'd stretch for exactly 6 minutes, then do 50 push-ups like it meant something sacred. He didn't talk much, but he started sharing the space like I was more than a shadow. He'd leave the toothpaste out for me, slide over a corner of his breakfast tray when mine came up short, even dropped a word to a guard when someone tried to trip me in line. "Watch where you're stepping," Jax said flatly. That was all it took. The guy didn't bother me again. Then one afternoon, he said something I didn't expect. "You said you didn't do it." I turned to him, surprised. "Yeah." He nodded once, like he believed me. "Why?" I asked. He shrugged. "I know that look." "What look?" He stared at me for a moment. Same one I had when I got locked up. Later that night, I asked, "So did you do it?" His jaw clenched. "No," he said quietly. But they needed someone who wouldn't talk. Someone who already looked guilty. I waited. He didn't say more. And I didn't push. Because something told me Jax didn't talk about his past, not unless it was earned. One weekend, something strange happened. We got mail. That almost never happened here. 2 envelopes. One for me, one for him. I opened mine. It was a blank piece of paper. Nothing written. Just blank. Chills ran down my spine. Across from me, Jax opened his letter. His jaw tensed. He folded the paper in half and burned it using a lighter he wasn't supposed to have. I watched the flame flicker in his eyes. What was that? I asked. He didn't answer. But later that night, he said, "You're not just here by chance, Tyler. Someone wanted you here. And before we go deeper, let's get this straight. If you're not here for real stories, if you're not gay or not someone who genuinely wants to understand our truth, then this probably isn't the channel for you. But if you're part of our LGBTQ plus family or someone who feels every word, every wound, every heartbeat in these stories, then subscribe now. Because when we hit 1,000 real supporters, we're dropping a powerful surprise that's only for our people. No clickbait, just raw, emotional, unforgettable stories that finally feel like us. To be continued in part 2. Someone sent me to prison, but the man on the other bunk, he might be the only one who can help me survive it. And he has secrets of his own. You're not just here by chance, Tyler. Someone wanted you here. Jack said it so quietly that I wasn't sure I'd heard him right. But the way his eyes stayed on the blank piece of paper, burnt corners still smoldering in the trash, I knew he meant every word. I sat frozen on my bunk. That cold, creeping feeling slithered back into my spine. What do you mean someone wanted me here? I asked. He didn't answer. Not then. Instead, he reached up, climbed back into his top bunk, and pulled his blanket over his chest, as if the conversation never happened. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. Unusual. Jax was always precise with his timing. Stretching, washing, breakfast. It was like watching a machine that had seen too much war. But now the bunk was empty, blanket folded. I looked around the yard, checked the chow line, even peeked near the showers. Nothing. It was like he just disappeared. And in prison, that wasn't a good sign. At rec, I sat on the bench pretending to read a tattered copy of The Road, but my eyes kept darting across the yard. Then I spotted him. Not alone, talking to someone near the far fence, an older man with a jagged scar down the side of his head. I'd seen him before, but never close. He was one of those guys people didn't mess with, not because he fought, but because he didn't have to. When Jax finally came back to the cell, I stood up before he even shut the door. Who was that? He gave me a flat look. What does it matter? Was it about the letter? He sat down slowly, resting his arms on his knees. Tyler, he said quietly, you don't want the truth? Not in here. Not yet. Yes, I do. He held my stare for a long moment, then finally spoke. Your file showed up 2 weeks before you did. Sealed. Special clearance. I frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying, he leaned forward, voice low and even, you were transferred here for a reason. You weren't supposed to be in Gen Pop. You were supposed to be in protective custody. I felt a breath hitch in my chest. Then why wasn't I? He gave a bitter smile. Because someone made sure you weren't. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Not because of noise, but because every part of me buzzed with paranoia. Who wanted me here? Who could get my files sealed and move me into a shared cell with Jax? More importantly, why? The next morning, a CO slipped a note under the cell door. No name, no handwriting, just one typed sentence. If you want to stay alive, stay away from him. I stared at it, so long my hands went cold. When Jack saw it, he didn't even react. Just tore it up and flushed it. You get those a lot? I asked. He nodded. More lately. Why me? He looked me straight in the eye. Because you weren't supposed to matter. A few hours later, I found out why I did. I was mopping the hallway near intake when one of the older inmates, a guy called Rico, leaned in and whispered, You're Tyler Whitmore? I stopped. Yeah. He nodded like something clicked into place. You're John Whitmore's son, ain't you? I froze. My dad. I croaked. You knew him? Rico laughed, bitter and low. Kid, your dad didn't just work the system. He was a system, until he crossed someone with real power. He leaned closer. And now that you're in here, they're going to finish what they started with him. That night, I sat in the dark, shaking. Jack sat on the floor again, flipping through pages of a book, but clearly not reading it. My dad, I finally said, he worked for the government, FBI analyst, went missing when I was 15. Not missing, Jax murmured. He was disappeared. I looked at him sharply. You knew? I didn't know he had a son. You knew him? Jax finally looked at me, and for the first time, there was pain in his eyes. Your dad was one of the only good men I ever met inside this system. He tried to blow the whistle. They buried him for it. I was speechless. My mom told me he just left. Ran off. Couldn't handle the pressure. Jax shook his head. She was protecting you. Maybe even herself. Suddenly, everything made sense. The sealed file. The blank paper. The warning. Someone wanted me dead. Not for who I was, but for who he was. I need to know everything. I whispered. I need to know who did this. Why I'm here. What happened to my dad. Jack stood, and for the first time since I met him, he reached for my hand. We'll find out, he said. But once we start digging, there's no going back. That night, as I lay on my bunk, staring at the ceiling, one thing was clear. I didn't end up in that cell by accident. And Jax, he wasn't just some hardened inmate. He was part of a story I didn't even know I was born into. And now, it was my turn to write the ending, to be continued in part 3. Who really buried the truth about my father? And what secret is Jax still hiding? Because in this place, the truth doesn't set you free, it gets you killed. I used to think my father had abandoned us. Now I know he was buried alive by the very people he worked for. And now I'm next. I didn't speak to anyone the next day. Jax kept close, walking beside me in the yard, not saying much. His eyes scanned the other inmates constantly, not in paranoia, more like preparation. He'd seen this coming. In the mess hall, I saw Rico again, the old-timer who knew my father. He was hunched over his tray, eating slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. I approached him cautiously. You said my dad tried to blow the whistle. He didn't look up. He saw something he shouldn't have. And instead of looking away like the rest of us, he filed a report. I leaned in. What kind of report? Now he looked up. His eyes were darker than I expected. You ever hear of Project Greyline? I shook my head. He pushed his tray aside and stood. You're not ready. Then he walked away. Back in the cell, I asked Jax about it. He didn't flinch. He told me about Greyline. Jax said, sitting cross-legged on his bunk, it was an off-the-book surveillance project. They were tracking inmates, activists, even journalists, people who pose a threat to the system. So like illegal spying? Worse, Jax replied. They were planting people, creating problems so they could solve them, like feeding chaos into machine. I sat down, feeling my heart race. My dad was trying to expose this? Jax nodded. And that got him killed? No, Jax said slowly. That got him sent here. I stared at him. Here? This prison. He met my eyes. You think it's coincidence you ended up in my cell? A chill ran up my spine. He added, your father was here for 2 years. Cell block D. Until they moved him to isolation. And then he vanished. Jax nodded. I was in Gen Pop then. Never saw him again. I stood, pacing. So he might still be alive? Jax hesitated. I don't know. But if anyone kept records, they'd be in the old admin wing. I frowned. The off-limits one? He nodded. The one sealed since the fire. The prison's west wing had been closed down 2 years ago after a mysterious fire. That's what the guards called it. But everyone inside knew better. Fires don't start themselves in file rooms. If my dad was held there, or if his records were, this might be the only way to find them. But there was a problem. They don't just let you stroll into the dead wing of a federal prison. Unless, later that night, Jax handed me a paperclip and a torn plastic strip from a lunch tray. What's this for? He raised an eyebrow. You want answers or not? The plan was simple. Stupid, Dangerous. Completely illegal. But simple. We'd cause a distraction in the rec yard. Nothing big. Just enough to pull guards away from the security room. Then, while the cameras looped, thanks to Jax's friend on kitchen duty, we'd slip into the back hallway and access the sealed door. If the file room hadn't been burned beyond recognition, I'd find my father's file. If it had, I'd find nothing but ash. Either way, I had to know. The next morning, things were tense. You could feel it in the yard, like the concrete itself was holding its breath. Jax stood next to me, pretending to stretch. "You ready?" I nodded. He gave a short whistle. On the far side of the yard, someone shouted, then threw a punch. The fight escalated instantly. Guards swarmed, whistles blew, inmates shouted. I took off, heart pounding, down the side corridor. The back door was where Jack said it would be, rusted, padlocked. I pulled the clip from my waistband and started picking. Click, click, then open. I slipped inside. Darkness swallowed me whole. The smell hit me first. Burnt paper, mold, death. I pulled a tiny flashlight from my sock, Jax's idea, and scanned the room. Files were everywhere. Charred, torn, scattered like someone wanted them found but not read. I dug through the filing cabinets, my hands trembling. Then I saw it, a folder with my last name, Whitmore John. I grabbed it. Inside, medical logs, solitary confinement reports, surveillance memos, and a final entry. Subject deemed unstable. No further interrogation recommended. To be transferred. No location listed. No transfer date. Just those last 3 words. To be transferred. But where? Suddenly, a voice behind me. "You're not supposed to be here." I spun around. A guard. Late 30s. Thick jaw. Pale eyes. But he didn't reach for his radio. He just stepped closer. "You look just like him," he said softly. "Like who?" "Your father." I stepped back. "You knew him?" He nodded. "I was there the night they dragged him from solitary." "Where'd they take him?" He looked at me for a long time, then said, "They didn't take him out. They took him down." My blood ran cold. What does that mean? But he didn't answer. He simply stepped aside and let me go. Back in the cell, I locked the folder in the hole behind the toilet tank. Jax was already waiting, arms crossed. Well, I sat on the edge of my bunk, heart pounding. He was here, my dad. They moved him. Somewhere down. Jax's jaw tightened. There's a sub-basement under isolation. A level not on any map. Only guards with clearance go down there. My hands were shaking. You think he's still there? He didn't answer right away. Then finally, we're going to find out, to be continued in Part 4. The prison has secrets beneath its foundation, and my father may still be one of them. But with every step we take, the walls close in. There are places inside this prison that aren't on any blueprint. Dark places, buried places, places built to hold things no one ever intended to explain. And now I knew where to look. Jax was pacing. He didn't do that often. He was usually still calm, cold, precise. But that night, he was wired, like something had been cracked open in him. You understand what you saw, right? He said, voice low but sharp. That my dad was taken somewhere beneath isolation? I replied. He shook his head. No, Tyler, that there's a level of this prison that doesn't officially exist. That we're talking about a place built under the system, without oversight, without cameras, without rules. I swallowed hard, and he might still be down there. Jack stopped pacing, looked at me dead on, or his body is. We didn't talk much the next morning, not because we were angry, but because the silence between us had started to mean something. It wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, like both of us knew something big was coming. And neither of us wanted to say out loud. By noon, Jax had a plan. Sort of. There's only one way to access the sub-basement, he told me as we walked laps in the yard. You have to be brought in through medical transport, which means you need to be labeled as violent, unstable, or unfit for general population. Unstable? I asked, like, fake a breakdown? He nodded. Fastest way. They'll move you to med isolation, and from there, if you're lucky, into the basement cells. I blinked. You been down there? His jaw flexed. Once. I waited, but he didn't elaborate. Just said, it's not a place you come back from. That night, I sat on my bunk, knees pulled to my chest. I don't know if I can pull off crazy, I whispered. Jax looked at me. Really looked at me. You've been thrown in prison for a crime you didn't commit. You're being hunted for your father's sins. You're already living in a nightmare. He paused. You don't have to act. Just stop hiding how it feels. 2 days later, it happened. During chow, I snapped. At least that's what it looked like. One inmate bumped me from behind. Hard. I shoved my tray to the ground, spun around and screamed. Loud. Desperate. Unhinged. I lunged at the guy, not to hurt him, just to make a scene. Guards tackled me within seconds. As they pinned me to the ground, I locked eyes with Jax across the room. He didn't flinch, but I saw something flash across his face. Worry, maybe fear, or maybe something closer to grief. They injected me with something in the infirmary. When I woke up, I was somewhere else. Gray walls, one small camera in the corner, no windows, no clock, a tiny bed, a metal toilet, and silence, real silence. This was below med isolation. This was the basement. They didn't call it that, of course. On the chart hanging from my door, it was labeled D-Pod X2. I spent the first day lying on the cot, trying to breathe evenly, trying to feel anything that wasn't fear. Then the voices started, not in my head. Real ones, from the cells around me. Whispers, conversations, soft crying. One man, somewhere far down the hall, was singing. It didn't feel like prison anymore. It felt like a tomb. On day 3, someone came. A man in a suit, not a guard, not a nurse. He sat outside my door with a clipboard and smiled like we were old friends. Mr. Whitmore, he said, we've been expecting you. I blinked. Who are you? He tilted his head. Does it matter? Your file says everything I need to know. I stepped closer. Where's my father? That smile didn't fade. You're asking the wrong question, he said softly. The right question is, why did your father try to save people who couldn't be saved? What does that mean? But he didn't answer. He just stood up, knocked twice on the door, and disappeared. Later that night, someone slipped something under my cot. A folded note. 2 words. Level 4, room 27. There was no signature, but the handwriting, it was shaky, precise. I recognized it from old birthday cards tucked away in my mom's attic. It was my dad's. I pressed my palms to the walls, desperate, shaking, trying not to sob. He was here, or at least he had been, alive enough to write, alive enough to send a message. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. And the next day, a guard came for me, said I was being transferred for evaluation. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't taking me to a shrink. He was taking me deeper. To be continued in Part 5. The prison's deepest level hides a man the world forgot. My father. But someone else knew I was coming, and he's been waiting for years. The hallway was colder than anything I'd ever felt. Not prison cold. Not winter cold. Something else. Like the place itself had forgotten what warmth was. The guard didn't speak. Just walked ahead with heavy boots that echoed through the empty corridor. I followed. Each step felt like I was sinking deeper into something I couldn't escape. We passed rows of empty rooms. Some had broken glass. Others were still sealed. Red tape across their door frames like scars left from secrets no one dared to open. At the end of the corridor, a rusted metal door. No window. No number. Just a keypad. The guard punched in the code, stepped aside, and nodded. Inside, the room was dim. One single bulb, swinging from a cable above. The smell hit me first. Sweat, mold, something faintly metallic, like old blood. And then, in the corner, I saw him. Or, I thought I did. He was sitting, knees tucked to his chest, head bowed, face him behind a mop of unshaven stubble and grayish-brown hair that didn't belong in this decade. I stepped closer. My throat tightened. "Dad." He didn't move. I crouched slowly, afraid I might break something fragile. "Dad, it's me, Tyler." A long pause. Then his head lifted. Eyes met mine. And I swear they were the same. The same hazel-flecked green that stared back at me in the mirror all my life. But they weren't whole anymore. They were fractured, like glass that had cracked and kept trying to hold itself together. "I knew you'd come," he said softly. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But all I could do was fall to my knees and whisper, "How?" He smiled, or tried to. "Jax," he told me once, "if anything ever happened, if the system took me, he'd find a way to send you to me." I shook my head, breath hitched. "You've been down here this whole time?" 17 years. The word stabbed. "I thought you left us," I whispered. "Mom," she said. "She did what she had to," he interrupted gently. "They told her I was dead. Threatened her if she asked questions. She was trying to protect you." He was thin, paler than anyone I'd ever seen, but his voice still strong. Still my dad. I helped him sit up straighter. His hands were ice. "They kept me here because of what I knew," he said. Gray Line wasn't just surveillance. It was a control system. They didn't just watch people. They manipulated them. Burned whistleblowers. Or worse. He looked down. Recruited them. "I have to get you out," I said. He laughed. "Just once." A bitter, broken laugh. "There's no out from this place." "There has to be." There was. He looked at me, and his name was Jax. He told me everything. How Jax was planted in the program. An informant turned prisoner. Someone who played both sides until he realized the damage he was doing. How he found my father locked in solitary years ago. How he vowed to expose it all, but only when the right time came. Then why didn't he? I asked. Because he needed someone they'd overlook. Someone unexpected. Someone connected to me, but innocent enough to go unnoticed. I blinked. "You mean me?" He nodded. They were watching for enemies. Not blood. That night, I wasn't taken back to my cell. They put me in a different room. Smaller. No cot. Just a bench and a drain in the floor. I sat there, sleepless, trying to figure out how to get both of us out alive. The next morning, Jax was waiting when they brought me to a transfer unit for medical reassignment. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't even supposed to know I was gone. But he stood against the far wall, hands cuffed in front, acting like it was coincidence. When the guard walked ahead, he leaned in close. "They're going to disappear you," he whispered. I nodded. I saw him. He's alive. His expression didn't change. But something in his eyes did. Relief, pain, rage, all at once. "I'm going back tonight," he murmured. "You can't. They'll kill you." "I know." He stepped back. "But they'll never expect me to be the distraction." Later that day, I was transferred back upstairs. But only because someone pulled strings to get me out. Someone wearing guard boots. And a tattoo on his left wrist I'd seen before. It wasn't Jax. It was the man I'd seen near the library. Silent. Watching. Turns out, not all of Jax's friends were locked behind bars. That night, I lay on my bunk, staring at the ceiling. Jax wasn't back yet. But I knew what he was doing. And I knew what it might cost. Then the sirens went off. Lights flickered. Shouts echoed down the halls. The prison was in lockdown. And Jax had made his move. To be continued in Part 6. He went back to save the man I thought I'd lost forever. But when systems break, someone always pays a price. And this time it might be him. The sirens weren't just noise. They were the sound of walls cracking, of secrets coming undone, and of someone, Jax, lighting a fire so bright the whole prison would have to see what had been hidden in its shadows for years. I stood by the barred window of our cell, heart pounding as the red lights flashed through the corridors like blood pulsing through a broken artery. Doors slammed. Boots thundered. Voices shouted. Then silence. That terrifying kind of silence you only hear when the system doesn't know how to respond. And in the middle of it, I knew exactly where he was. Back in the basement, where no one was supposed to go, where my father still sat behind a door with no key. They tried to put us in full lockdown, but the system was already cracking. Multiple cells were open at once. Internal alarms jammed. 2 guards knocked out. Jax had planned this. Not overnight. Not in days. For years, I watched the hallway from our cell window, waiting. Nothing. No movement. Then 2 quick flashes of a hallway light. Off. On. Off. The signal. Someone was coming. Minutes later, our door opened. A guard I didn't know motioned for me to follow. I hesitated. Jax sent me, he said flatly. Move. We weaved through a staff tunnel I didn't know existed. Under the infirmary. Past laundry. Into the sealed wing no inmate had stepped into since the fire. At the end of the corridor, 2 figures waited. One of them, limping, thin, gray hair messy. My father. The other? Jax. Blood on his sleeve. A cut across his cheekbone. Breathing heavy, but still standing. Still alive. When he saw me, something in his eyes changed. Relief. And something deeper. Something I hadn't dared name until that moment. Love. You got him out. I breathed. He nodded. Barely. Dad leaned against the wall, weak but alert. I told you, he said to Jax, smiling faintly. You weren't done saving me. Jax helped him up straighter. Now we save your son. There was a plan. There had always been a plan. But now I had to move faster. Because now the prison knew something was wrong. Jax handed me a map, hand-drawn, scrawled on the back of a confiscated Bible page. North Tunnel. Laundry exit. It's how contraband used to move before the warden cracked down. Still works. What about you? I asked. I stay. Create a second breach. Draw them away. No, I snapped. We go together. You go with your dad. And leave you behind? He took a slow step forward, rested his forehead against mine. This was never about saving me, Tyler. It is now. His voice dropped to a whisper. I love you. That's why I need you to make it out. I wanted to argue, to scream, to hold him and not let go. But I saw in his face. He'd made peace with the risk. He had nothing left to lose. Except me. We moved through the tunnel fast. Jax split off near the generator room, vanishing into the smoke and flickering emergency lights. I kept looking back, but he never looked over his shoulder. The tunnel was narrow, suffocating. My father wheezed behind me, stumbling, leaning on the guard who'd helped us. We're almost there. I whispered, keep going. We reached a hatch near the loading bay. It was rusted shut. I jammed my shoulder into it. Once, twice. Then, boom, a sound behind us. A flash of orange light from a hallway. Gunfire. My blood froze. Keep moving, the guard shouted. I yanked the hatch open and pushed my father through. We crawled into the night air. Fresh, cold, biting like truth. I collapsed to my knees. We were out, but Jax wasn't. I turned back toward the tunnel, but the guard grabbed my shoulder. No, you'll die in there. You don't understand, he's... I do understand, he said, then added, he knew what he was doing, and he made you promise. I clenched my jaw. Tears blurred my vision. I didn't promise. But I had, silently. Every time he shielded me. Every time he told me the truth. Every time he let me feel safe, even when he wasn't. That night, we vanished into the wind. My father and I disappeared with a name, a new ID, and a secret that would someday tear open the system from the inside out. But not yet, because someone was still inside. I watched the prison from a ridge on the far side of the woods. No alarms now, just a building still standing, a monster asleep, and somewhere inside it, the only man who had ever made me feel seen. Jax, I whispered into the dark, I'm coming back for you. To be continued in part 7. We made it out, but freedom isn't freedom until he walks out too. And to break the system, I'll have to become someone else entirely. You'd think getting out would feel like a victory. It didn't. It felt like I'd left a part of myself behind. Because I had. The air outside prison didn't smell like bleach or blood. It smelled like pine diesel, and the kind of cold that cuts through your chest before your lungs remember what breathing is supposed to feel like. I should have cried tears of relief. But all I felt was guilt, because the man who saved me, the man who loved me, was still locked inside a nightmare I couldn't wake him from. And now it was my turn to save him. My father, and I didn't speak much for the first 48 hours. We were in a safe house run by someone Jax trusted, an ex-federal officer named Cameron, now off-grid in northern Montana. It was colder than I expected. Not just the air, but the atmosphere. Everything was gray. The walls, the sky, even the coffee. Like freedom had lost its color without him. I sat at the window most nights, staring into the distance like I could see the prison miles and states away. Cameron finally said one evening, "You know you can't go back." "Not yet." I didn't answer. He put a file in front of me. "What's this?" "Names. Agents. People connected to Gray Line. The ones who built it. The ones who buried your father. And the ones who buried Jax." I flipped through the file. There were pictures, timelines, secret meetings, code names, a web of corruption that made the prison look like a symptom, not the disease. At the center of it all, a man named Thomas Ridley, assistant deputy of the Federal Correctional Oversight Program, the same man who had signed my sealed prison intake form. "He's the one who ordered my transfer," I said quietly. Cameron nodded. "He's the one who controls who goes in and who never comes out." That night, I sat beside my dad near the fire. He looked stronger than he did in that cell, but he still walked with a slight hunch, like the weight of years underground hadn't quite lifted. "I want to go back," I said. "I figured," he replied. "You're not going to stop me?" He turned toward me, slowly. "How could I? You're your mother's courage and my stubbornness. That was always going to make a dangerous mix." I smiled faintly. "You never talk about her." He exhaled through his nose. "She kept you alive, and she gave up everything to do it. That's all I ever needed to remember." The next morning, I had a plan, or at least the start of one. To free Jax, I needed 3 things. Proof of who he was and what he'd done inside the system. A way in, not as an inmate, but as someone who could move freely. A story, believable enough to get me close without getting shot. Cameron leaned back in his chair and said, "You're talking about espionage. That's not something you can just wing." "I'm not winging anything," I replied. He arched a brow. "What do you call walking into the lion's den with a folder and a vendetta?" "I call it paying him back." The plan started with Ridley. I knew he was the key. He ran logistics for the entire Western Correctional Division, including the prison I had just escaped from. If I could get to him, I could get Jax out. But Ridley wasn't accessible to just anyone, so I became someone. 2 weeks later, I wasn't Tyler Whitmore anymore. I was Lucas Rayner, recently appointed communications consultant under a fake initiative to improve federal prison transparency and public image. It was a fake job with a real ID badge and a mission. My first meeting with Ridley took place in a sleek glass office in Washington, D.C., where everything was marble, espresso, and unearned power. He was older than I expected, polished, but his eyes, lifeless. The kind of man who didn't just lie for a living. He lied for pleasure. I handed him my proposal. He smiled, flipping through it, barely glancing at the words. "We don't usually entertain public outreach in classified facilities," he said. I smiled back. "I was told you're the one person who sees the bigger picture." That did the trick. Narcissists love flattery. I spent a week embedded with a rotation crew that visited for maximum security prisons under Ridley's umbrella. The last one on the list? Stonebridge Federal Correctional Facility. The one I had just escaped from. The one where Jack still was. I wore a suit, carried a clipboard, and smiled like I didn't know what the walls had whispered to me months earlier. We toured the admin wing, the cafeteria, the workrooms, but not the D-pod. Never the D-pod. I asked casually during the walk, "What's down that hallway?" "Storage." The warden replied without breaking stride. but his jaw twitched. And that was all I needed. That night, I hacked into the internal log system. Nothing illegal, just a laptop, a guest Wi-Fi connection, and a disguised scanner app Cameron had built. I searched for every report tag D-Pod. Most had been redacted, except one, an old entry from 6 years ago. Inmate, Jackson R. Cole. Status, under evaluation. Notes, asset compromised. Reclassified, expendable. My breath caught. They had planned to kill him years ago, and somehow he survived. I copied everything, every document, every signature. Then I made the call. Cameron answered on the second ring. You got what you need? Yes, I said, and I need to get back in. He sighed. Tell me you're not going alone. I'm not. He waited. I added. You're coming with me. The plan was dangerous. No deniable exit. No guarantees. But it would work. Because this time I had leverage. Back in the warden's office, I laid out 3 things on his desk. My ID, Jax's file, a flash drive. This is your choice, I said. Either you help me get him out and scrub every record of our escape, or I leak everything to press. The warden didn't even look at the flash drive, just said, How did you get this? I have people, I replied coldly. The kind of people who are tired of dying quietly. He stared at me, then said, We'll arrange the transfer. 1 week. I didn't sleep for 6 days. Not because I was scared, but because I needed him out. Whole, breathing, mine. And I didn't know what 7 years in hell had done to him. On the 7th day, I waited in the woods behind Stonebridge. Same ridge where I'd once promised the sky I'd come back for him. A van pulled up. 2 men stepped out. Then, him. He stepped out slow, cautious, hands still cuffed. His hair longer, his jaw sharper, his presence just as devastating. When he saw me, he stopped. His eyes, those dark, calculating, beautiful eyes, softened. He whispered, You really did it. I walked toward him. He laughed. For the first time I'd ever heard. It was raw and cracked and perfect. I pulled him into me. No hesitation. He breathed into my neck. You came back. I said I would. He held my face in both hands. I never wanted anything more than this. Then stay. I'm yours. We burned everything that tied us to that prison. Files, IDs, even the clothes we wore when we escaped. We were ghosts now, but together, to be continued in Part 8. They took everything from us, but they couldn't kill the truth. Now, we'll make sure no one ever buries again. Freedom isn't peace. It's pressure to stay hidden, to stay ahead, to stay sane. We were free, on paper and breath and skin, but the prison hadn't really let go of us. It clung to us in our sleep, in the way Jax still flinched at loud doors, in the way I kept looking over my shoulder at gas stations, in how my dad spoke in incomplete sentences, like full truths might still get him killed. But we had one advantage now, each other. We moved to a safe house in Oregon, remote, no cell towers, no neighbors, just a cabin, a creek, and a plan. Cameron helped us set up surveillance. My dad kept digging through the flash drive we recovered. And Jax watched me sleep like I was something fragile. He was afraid to lose again. I dreamed you weren't real, he said one morning, while I lay half asleep, his hand tracing lazy patterns down my back. I mumbled. What was I then? He kissed my temple. A ghost, a memory, a chance I never thought I'd get back. I turned toward him, eyes barely open. I'm real, and I'm not going anywhere. His smile was small, but it lit up his whole face. Promise? Yeah, but only if you stop hogging the blanket. But the quiet didn't last. It never does. Not when you're holding the kind of truth that topples systems. My dad printed out a document from the drive. A transfer log from 2016. Location, Stonebridge Prison. Subject, Jackson R. Cole. Classification, asset turn liability. Disposition order, contain or terminate. There was a signature at the bottom. Thomas Ridley. That name again. The puppet master. And now we had proof. Jax didn't want to go public. Not right away. This is the kind of story that gets people disappeared, he said. They'll smear us, deny it, claim it's fabricated. They can't, I argued. Not with your file. Not with my dad's. They won't need to, he said. They'll just bury us deeper this time. I reached for his hand. Then we make them choke on the dirt. We contacted a journalist. Not just any journalist. Elena Marquez, a Pulitzer-nominated investigative reporter who had once nearly exposed a military black site before her story was buried under a fake scandal. She agreed to meet. One condition. In person, off the grid. We arranged a meet-up 3 days later. Jax, my dad, and I drove to a clearing in the Columbia Gorge. She showed up alone. Tall, leather jacket, camera hanging from her shoulder, eyes like steel. You got 10 minutes to convince me this isn't a suicide mission, she said. I handed her the files. My father's statement, Jax's records, the floor plans of the hidden D-pod, scans of the Gray Line directives with Ridley's signature. She didn't blink. Just read. Absorbed. Recorded everything with 2 hidden cameras clipped to her bag straps. This, she whispered, could burn the Bureau to the ground. Jax crossed his arms. That's the goal. Elena agreed to release the story in 3 parts. Carefully, timed, names redacted until the last second. She promised federal eyes wouldn't see it coming. But deep down, we all knew they would come anyway. That night, Jax was quiet. Too quiet. We lay in bed under the dim cabin light. The covers tangled around our legs. You okay? I asked. He exhaled slowly. You ever feel like you're waiting for a bomb to go off, even when everything's still? Yeah. He turned to me, his jaw clenched. I don't know how to live in the quiet. You will. He looked at me, uncertain. I moved closer, brushing my lips to his. You have me now. That's not quiet. That's home. 2 nights later, the safe house alarm went off. Not the loud one, the subtle one, the backdoor sensor. Someone was nearby. Jax moved first, knife in hand. Silent. Cameron and my dad locked themselves in the crawl space under the stairs. I grabbed the old revolver we kept in the nightstand drawer. I wasn't shaking. Not anymore. Jax pressed against the wall near the back door, eyes focused, listening. Then, footsteps. Outside, 3 pairs. Then a knock, but not a threatening one. A pattern. 2, pause. 1, pause. Too fast. Jax's breath caught. That's, he whispered. He opened the door. Rico, the old inmate who told me about my father. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, 2 more men, both ex-staff from Stonebridge. Jax stepped back, stunned. How the hell? They're ready to talk, Rico said. Inside, over cheap coffee, they gave us everything. People inside are scared, one of them said. Ridley's trying to bury D-pod, move remaining inmates, torch files, frame it as an infrastructure failure. He's erasing evidence. I said, fast. Then we move faster. Jax growled. We recorded their testimonies. 3 hours of footage. Passwords. Hidden rooms. Black budgets. Even security footage of Jax escorting my dad out through the generator hall. It was gold. Elena sent word. We go live in 48 hours. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat outside under the stars, the cold biting my skin. Jax joined me, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. You ever wonder what life's going to feel like after? I asked. He looked up at the stars. No, I never thought I'd get to after. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I turned to him. Tell me something real, something nobody else knows. He thought, then said softly, when I first met you, I didn't care who you were. You were just a cellmate, another job. I nodded. Yeah, I figured. But then he looked down. You asked me what I dreamed about. I remember. He smiled. No one's ever asked me that, not even before I went in. And when you did, something cracked open in me, like I could breathe again. I reached for his hand. What do you dream about now? He looked me dead in the eye. You. Always you. To be continued in Part 9. The story is about to go public, and the world's about to learn what they buried beneath the system. But the truth never comes without a cost. It started with a headline. Whistleblower reveals secret torture program in U.S. federal prison. Under it, photos, redacted documents, and the name Jackson R. Cole listed not as a felon, but a former government asset. Jack stared at the screen, silent, still. Then he closed his eyes and whispered. They finally said my name right. Within hours, the internet erupted. Hashtag Stonebridge cover-up. Hashtag Justice for Jax. Hashtag Tyler and Jax. Hashtag Exposing Grayline. Elena's 3-part story went viral before breakfast. Whistleblowers stepped forward. Retired prison staff spoke anonymously. Even a former senator hinted at a classified program he'd once tried defund. My father's written testimony ran as an editorial in the Washington Post. By nightfall, the name Thomas Ridley was trending worldwide, not as protector of national security, but as a war criminal in a tailored suit. And for a few hours, it felt like the world might actually care. But justice doesn't come clean. It fights dirty. The next day, our names were in the media too, but not the way we expected. They painted me as an emotional ex-inmate trying to ride a scandal to fame. They called Jax an unstable former operative with a history of violent behavior. Some anchor even said, if these men are so innocent, why did they run? I wanted to scream. But Jax just smirked and said, that's how you know we scare them. Then the threat started. Emails, encrypted messages, a car outside the cabin with its plates removed. We moved again, this time deeper into the forest. Elena called that night. They know where you are, she warned. You need to disappear just until the Senate hearings begin. I'm not hiding, Jax growled. I know, she said, but if you die before you testify, the system wins. We packed light, but I took the photo. Just one. Me and Jax. Taken 3 days before the escape. I'm laughing in it, head tilted back. He's not smiling, but his eyes are soft, focused only on me. I folded it and tucked it into my pocket. It was a reminder. This wasn't just about burning the system. It was about building a life together after fell. Our next safe house was smaller. Just one room, a wood stove, a trapdoor in the kitchen that led to a cold cellar filled with backup supplies and an old typewriter. Jack slept with his arm around me every night, like he thought I might disappear if he let go. And maybe he was right to be afraid. 3 days later, the cabin was breached. It happened fast. A single bang on the door, then a flash grenade through the side window. I hit the floor, ears ringing. Jax pulled me behind the stove. Gunfire erupted. My dad dove into the cellar. Cameron grabbed a radio and shouted, Code red, we're blown. Men in black, gear stormed the cabin. No insignias. No warning. Not government. Contractors. Get out. Cameron screamed, pulling a hidden rifle from the chimney. Jax shoved me through the back door. I'll hold them, he shouted. No, Jax. But he was already gone. I ran with my dad through the trees, heart slamming against my ribs. Behind me, shots, screams, then silence, the kind that sounds like grief. We reached a ravine and hid in a drainage pipe. I couldn't breathe, not until Cameron's voice came over the radio. Jax is down, not dead, captured. My blood froze. I grabbed the mic. Where are they taking him? But Cameron didn't answer. Elena called that night. They're spinning this hard, she said. They're calling him a fugitive again. Said he attacked federal officers during an arrest. They're trying to discredit everything. But the hearings, they're trying to delay them, bury the files, claim it's incomplete evidence. I'm fighting, but you're running out of time. I wanted to burn the whole world down. Instead, I whispered into dark, Hold on, Jax. I'm not losing you now. Cameron found where they were keeping him. Not a prison. A black site. Underground. Unmapped. just like before. It's a ghost facility, Cameron explained. It doesn't officially exist. No guards, just silence. They're trying to make him vanish again. I nodded. Then we do what ghosts do. He frowned. What's that? We haunt them. The plan wasn't just risky. It was suicidal. We had one shot. A 20-minute window when a supply drop came in via drone. One elevator. No backup. Just me, Cameron, my dad, and a blueprint drawn by someone who hadn't seen inside in 17 years. Before we left, I sat on the cabin floor and wrote one letter. To Jax. I didn't know if I'd get to read it to him, or if he'd ever read it at all. But I had to write it. Jax, if you're reading this, I either saved you or I failed. I hope it's the first. Because there's too much I still want with you. Mornings where we don't flinch at sunlight. Nights where the bed is ours and no one else's. A future that doesn't require us to hide. You saved me more than once. Now it's my turn. So hold on. For me, we moved at dawn, dressed in stolen tactical gear, armed only with what we could carry. I didn't feel scared anymore, just ready. The site was hidden beneath an abandoned ranger station, a hatch on the floor, a biometric lock we tricked with a preserved fingerprint file from a former supervisor who now worked in waste disposal. Inside, silence, and cold, always cold. We found him in a concrete room with no lights. No windows, hands shackled, shirt torn, face bruised but eyes alert. When he saw me, he blinked once, twice, like he didn't believe it. Then, you always were stubborn. I ran to him, choking on relief. Cameron disabled the restraints. My dad stood watch at the door, and I wrapped my arms around the man who had become my entire reason to fight. He buried his face in my neck. I knew you'd come. I kissed his forehead. You promised me home. I'm holding you to it. We blew the generator, set the system on fire, and disappeared back into the woods before backup even knew the place existed. The hearings began 3 days later. Jax testified first. My father second. Me last. We didn't cry on the stand. We didn't shout. We just told the truth. And it echoed loud enough that even the men in suits couldn't ignore it anymore. To be continued in Part 10. The truth has been spoken, but justice isn't given. It's taken. And we're not stopping until the system that broke us is broken for good. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not the air, the atmosphere. The kind of cold that comes from polished shoes, fake smiles, and men in dark suits who have never once felt afraid for their lives. Jack sat beside me, jaw tight. He looked different in a suit, like a man who'd rebuild himself piece by piece, and dare the world to try and break him again. My father was behind us, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. We were here, and we weren't running anymore. Across the room, Thomas Ridley. He didn't flinch when the chair squeaked under him. Didn't blink when the clerk called his name. Just stared ahead with the kind of smug calm that only comes from decades of thinking you'll never get caught. Mr. Ridley, the senator asked, "Are you aware of the Gray Line files?" He didn't even pause. "No, Senator, I am not." "Were you involved in approving off-record detention centers within federal prisons?" "Absolutely not." "And are you familiar with the name Jackson R. Cole?" He looked at Jax, dead in the eye, then smiled. I've never seen that man before in my life. I felt Jax's body tense next to me. My fingers brushed his under the table. I didn't have to say anything. He understood. He always did. Then they called me to the stand. The walk from the bench to the chair felt like crossing a battlefield. Everyone watching. Every second stretching like it might never end. I took my seat. Swore in. The senator leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, tell us, in your own words, what you experienced inside Stonebridge." I told him everything. The moment Jax became my cellmate. The secrets. The hidden rooms. The night we escaped. The nights I thought we might not survive. I told him about the men who helped us. The ones who didn't make it out. And I told him about the love I found in a place built to break people. "Do you believe the government knew about the torture you witnessed?" the senator asked. Yes. Do you believe they approved it? I don't believe anything anymore, I said quietly. But I know Ridley signed the documents. I have his signature. I have the receipts. I lived it. Do you fear retaliation? I looked at Jax, then back at the senator. No, not anymore. When I stepped down, I felt lighter, like every brick they'd stacked on my chest had finally cracked. But Ridley? He wasn't finished. They gave him the mic for rebuttal, and he used it to lie. Smoothly, calmly, he claimed we forged the files. He claimed my father was a mentally unstable ex-engineer who had faked his death to cover up his own crimes. He claimed Jax was a violent felon who romanticized captivity to rewrite his history. And then he looked directly at me and said, "We shouldn't make heroes out of criminals just because they know how to cry on cue." That's when Jack stood up, unprompted, unafraid. "No one made me a hero," he said. "I was never the hero in this story." The room fell completely silent. I did bad things. For people like you. I followed orders I shouldn't have. I stayed silent when I should have screamed. And I live with that silence every day in that cell. He took a step forward. "But the one thing I'll never regret is the day I met him." He pointed to me. "And the day I decided not to let you win anymore." The senator called for order. Ridley looked shaken for the first time. And in that moment, I knew he was scared. The hearing ended with calls for a full investigation. Ridley was placed under federal inquiry. Gray Line was suspended indefinitely. D-Pod was officially decommissioned. And a new committee was formed to look deeper, further, wider, because we weren't the only ones. Elena's final article went live that night. Front page. Not just a story, a movement. That evening, back at the safe house, Jax and I sat under the stars, legs tangled, blanket wrapped around our shoulders. He was quiet. I asked, "What are you thinking?" He said, "I've spent years planning how to survive the next hour. Not once did I imagine what it'd feel like to have a future." I smiled. "Well, what do you want to look like?" He glanced at me, then shrugged. "I don't know. Coffee that doesn't taste like metal. A dog, maybe. You waking me up every morning by kicking me in your sleep." I laughed. "That's not a future. That's a Tuesday." He leaned closer. "Well then, I want 1,000 Tuesdays." We kissed under a moon that finally didn't feel like it was watching over a prison yard. We held each other like we were allowed to, like we belonged to each other. There was one more thing I hadn't told him. I pulled the photo from my pocket, the one from before the escape. He looked at it, smiled. "I remember this." "I kept it," I said, "even when I thought I might never see you again." His voice was soft. "You always see the end before anyone else." "No," I said, "I just never stopped believing there was more." To be concluded in Part 11, we survived the system. We burned down the lies. And now we get to write our own story. One last chapter remains. 1 year later, no one called us fugitives anymore. The headlines had changed. So had we. The world didn't fix itself overnight. Systems don't unravel just because the truth makes noise. But for once, that noise was impossible to ignore. Ridley was indicted, not just for abuse of power, but for conspiracy, fraud, and crimes against humanity. He pled not guilty. Of course. But then came the wave. Prisoners from 5 different states came forward. Ex-agents. Dead files that suddenly came alive. The government couldn't hide anymore. Because we were no longer hiding either. We bought a house on the edge of a forest near the coast. Not fancy, not huge, but it had windows that caught the morning light just right, and a porch swing Jack pretended he didn't love, even though he used it more than me. Cameron lived half a mile up the road in a cabin he built himself. Dad took a job as a contractor for a reform advocacy group. He even started using his full name again. And me? I wrote, not for fame, not for clicks, but to remember, to remind myself what we walked through and who I got to walk out with. Some nights, I'd find Jack standing in the backyard barefoot, staring up at the stars, not like he was haunted, but like he finally had the time to look I'd slip my arms around his waist from behind and press my face to his back. And he'd say, always in that low voice, "Still here?" Every time I answered the same way. Always. The first time we went to the beach, he hesitated. The feel of open space, of no walls, it overwhelmed him. "I don't trust it," he said. "It's too free." But I laced my fingers through his. "Then I'll hold you until you do." We walked barefoot through the surf. Jeans rolled, water freezing. I turned to look at him and caught a smile I hadn't seen before. Not the guarded one, not the tired one. A real one, unburdened, like he'd stopped waiting for the sky to fall. It took time, but we built routines. He made breakfast. I cleaned up. He read nonfiction. I wrote fiction based on nonfiction I never thought I'd live through. We both left the lights on more than we needed, just because we could. One evening, I came home to find a wrapped box on the kitchen table. No card, no reason. Inside, a silver chain with a dog tag, not military, just engraved with one word, free. I turned to find him leaning against the doorway. He shrugged. "It's not flashy." I stepped close, took his hand, and slipped the chain into his palm. "It's everything." We visited the graves. The ones Cameron had quietly arranged markers for, men like Rico, the 2 ex-staff whistleblowers, and others who hadn't made it out. We left stones, notes, and silence, but not guilt, not anymore, because they hadn't died in vain. A year to the day after we escaped, we returned to D.C. We stood in front of a small auditorium packed with press, advocates, and officials. They unveiled a new bill, one Jax helped write, one that redefined oversight standards for all federal prisons, one named after him, the Cole Act. He hadn't wanted his name on it, but I made sure it was there, because after all the pain, all the silence, the world deserved to know who he really was. Not a shadow, not a weapon, but a man who loved, lost, and rebuilt. That night, in our hotel room, I caught him staring at the plaque they'd given him. "What are you thinking?" I asked. He turned. "I think," he paused, "I'm ready." "For what?" He took a deep breath. "To stop surviving and start living." We drove home in silence. Not the tense kind. The kind that fills up with something warm. Hope. And maybe love still unfolding. Back at the house, we unpacked slowly. I curled up on the couch. He walked to the porch. Then I heard him call out, "Tyler." I stepped outside. He was standing under the soft porch light, holding something behind his back. "What's that?" He smiled. Nervous. That was rare. Then he pulled it out. A ring. Simple. Silver. Engraved inside with just 2 words. No walls. I stared at him, stunned. He said quietly, "We've been through every version of hell. But somehow, this is still the easiest decision I've ever made." He held it out. No big speech. No kneeling. Just a man who once guarded every part of himself. Finally opening all of it to me, I stepped forward. "I don't care about a wedding." "I do," he said. "I don't care about rings." "You will," he grinned. I took his hand. "I just want a life." His lips brushed mine. "Then say yes." I did. I do. I always will. The system may not remember us in history books, but we'll remember each other. Every second, every scar, every miracle. Because we weren't just survivors. We were meant to begin again. Thank you for reading. He was my cellmate, but he wasn't who I thought he was.